more specific about the impacts of resource extraction on Inuit women and communities. So prior to this particular project, we had done a smaller scale project that looked at the impact of resource extraction on the community of Baker Lake in Nunavut. And this project was conducted in conjunction with the University of British Columbia in 2016 and 2018. And there were a variety of findings around the general impacts of resource extraction on the well-being of Inuit women and Inuit communities. And one area that we wanted to focus on that kind of aligned with funding opportunities and advocacy opportunities was to look at workplace procedures in operations across Inuit Nunavut in the north, where Inuit women are hired and work in these sectors. And that's more specifically delving into the topic of workplace sexual harassment and violence. So this project specifically was initiated in 2018 and is sort of in the stages of being wrapping up right now. But we wanted to hone in on this particular topic and gain a more holistic understanding across Inuit Nunavut. As I mentioned before, the previous project was only kind of focused in Baker Lake, so we wanted to get a general understanding of the topic and issue across Inuit Nunavut. So that's been the work for a few years now. Felicia and I have been at the onset of this topic and project since 2018. We've conducted with partners a holistic literature review that looks at the general impacts of resource extraction on the well-being of Indigenous women, and more specifically Inuit women. That was kind of timely and aligned with the results and findings and calls to actions that came out of the inquiry into missing murdered Indigenous women and girls a couple years back. And we've also conducted our own survey in conjunction in partnership with the Firelight Group that looked at direct experiences of Inuit women in the workplace across Inuit Nunavut, and we can delve into a little bit more into the presentation around some of the findings and themes. And our hope is that we can use these findings not only to particularly address this specific issue and topic and talk about it a little bit more, but also gain traction as a representative organization to do more advocacy on the policy and political side alongside our governmental partners to advocate more holistically on behalf of Inuit women in terms of representation in all stages of operations, from the onset until operations are wrapping up, because of the critical role played by this particular industry in the well-being and development and socioeconomic development of Inuit communities and families. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Janelle. Thank you. And my colleagues at the Firelight Group will delve into the key findings a little bit more. But essentially, this project aimed to illuminate the reality of workplace sexual violence and harassment for Inuit women in Inuit Nunavut, as well as to identify gaps, opportunities, and recommendations regarding Inuit women's security and prosperity in Inuit Nunavut. So that was a summation of the findings that was released in the report in March of this year, early this year. The results of these studies are based on qualitative and quantitative survey data, which were completed by 29 women across Inuit Nunavut, specifically in the communities of Afiat in Nunavut, Saluit in Nunavik, Inuvik in the Inuvialuit region, and Baker Lake in the Kivalliq region of Nunavut. We weren't able to travel, although it was our intention. We never actually quite made it to Nunatsiavut because that type of timing aligned with the onset of the pandemic. So that's one of the gaps in our research at the moment. But we still tried to gain a more fulsome understanding of the topic and the issue as a whole. So from here, I'll pass it on to our colleagues at the Firelight Group to speak a little bit more in depth about some of the key findings of the study, the intention of the project, and the release of the report itself.
Thank you so much, Lima. And good afternoon to everyone. My name is Dr. Ginger Gibson. I'm a director with the Firelight Group, which is an Indigenous-owned research firm that was contracted to work alongside Pauktuutit. I just want to say hello and also acknowledge our new GG, our new Governor General, Mary Simon. That was an exciting thing yesterday to occur in our country. And also thank Rebecca for not retiring, because it's the shoulders of the women who we stand on, that we look to. So I'm thankful that you're continuing to do your work, and happy to be here moderating alongside my colleagues. So I was the lead author on this project, along with Lima, Felicia, and Janelle. Janelle's also with the Firelight Group, a senior researcher with us there. So I'm going to cover our 5 key findings, and then Janelle is going to cover where do we go from here, and then we'll turn to our moderated discussion. So in short, it's a long report, so we're eager for people to read the whole thing. But in short, we found 5 things. First of all, that many Inuit women are engaged in the minerals economy from positions in janitorial, in many different areas, including up to senior management. And that they're both gaining their incomes and their family and supporting families based on those incomes in the minerals economy, but are reporting both positive and negative experiences associated with working in that economy. Women, generally speaking, our second finding is that women are generally speaking supporting large families, but their salaries are generally lower. And we find this across the country in salaries. We see this statistically across the country, that Indigenous women in particular have much lower salaries than Indigenous and non-Inuit and Inuit men. And so that's a problem with respect to salaries that we expect to see addressed. More than half of the women that we surveyed in this work experienced repeated events of sexual harassment and violence in the workplace, but many of them did not report those incidents. The reasons for not reporting those incidents were often due to the experience of not being listened to, the experience of not being believed, the experience of that there would be further stigma, that their work, that their job would be influenced, fear of job loss, and fear of being stigmatized for reporting that. We spent quite a bit of time in our work looking at what Inuit women that were working within the industry wanted to see. And what we heard was that women really want to see much more robust workplace policies that address the gender and Inuit specific impacts. So that there be specialized approaches to dealing with workplace sexual violence and harassment that is understood broadly by both men and women. So that the reporting approaches, people often didn't understand what the procedures were for reporting. And they also there was a lot of, we found that very few people found that their incidences, when they were reported, were actually tracked and covered over time. So the understanding of what happens once a report is made is something to address as well. Those are some of our top findings. We encourage you to take a look at the report and also ask us questions and answer ourselves in the context of this session. And now for where do we go from here, what the report recommended, I'll turn to our senior researcher, Janelle.
Thank you, Ginger. Hi, everybody. Yes, as Ginger mentioned, from the results of the study, we wanted to understand and synthesize how do we go from here and what do we do with these findings from this research and from the words and the stories and experiences shared by the women in this project. And from that, we were able to pull out 5 key recommendations on where to go in terms of recommendations and next steps. The first recommendation that came was about hiring more Inuit women in supervisory, managerial, and human resource roles. This particularly came from women saying that when they went to report any instances or issues, they often did not see themselves in those roles of who they were reporting and speaking to, and did become an issue of safety and trust. So hiring more Inuit women in those roles was a key recommendation. The second recommendation was about revising policies and practices around sexual harassment and violence. This extends to policies and practices around how incidents are recorded, how they are reported, how they are acted on, and how they go to protect and support women who are reporting these incidents. The third recommendation is about providing employee training that is both robust and relevant to not only eliminating occurrences of sexual violence and harassment in the workplace, but also how to recognize it, how to report it safely, and also how to improve employee behavior on site as well, training about what is a respectful workplace for all employees while on site. The fourth recommendation is about improving the social, cultural, and emotional support services in the workplace. This extends to providing Inuit-led and Inuit-driven social, cultural, and emotional support services at the workplace, be it on site or having access to these services on and off site as well. And the fifth recommendation is about ensuring that offenders are held accountable and face real consequences for their behavior, both within the company and the community. And that includes when an incident occurs, ensuring that there is decisive action taken against offenders, ensuring that the survivors understand and feel heard when an incident occurs, and ensuring that there is accountability for people who are offending and inflicting these upon women. These are the key recommendations as well as next steps from the report. And we wanted to bring these 5 recommendations forward as a launching point to our discussion with our panelists, who are key and senior policy advisors in their roles, both within the resource extraction industry, within the federal government and within Pauktuutit. And we just wanted to keep these recommendations front of mind for everybody about where do we go here and what can we do with this. And so I'm very excited to hear the discussion that's going to be had today with our panelists. And from here, I will pass it back to Lima as we go into our discussion. And I just maybe will say a quick reminder to anybody who's attending. If you have any questions as we go through this discussion, please enter them into the question and answer dialog box that you will see there. I will be able to see those questions and I can then ask them as we go through it and especially when the topic comes up. So please use the question and answer box. Your question won't be visible to everybody else, but it will be visible to myself, just in case anybody's wondering who sees that. So back to you, Lima. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Janelle. So as has been explained by Janelle, we provide this overview to set context for the general discussion. And the first question we'd like to pose to folks on this panel is, how does this topic resonate within your organization and institution? And do you have any examples, for example, funding opportunities or programs, etc., that you can reference to in relation to this topic specifically and the key findings and themes of the report?
Let's go to Rebecca. Rebecca, looking at this report and thinking about how this sits with you, what do you think that there's a role for Pauktuutit in addressing these issues further and supporting Inuit women in particular in, for example, Agnico Eagle or in Baffin land? What can be done from Pauktuutit to support women as they are working in these roles?
I think right from the start of the gold mine in Baker Lake or near Baker Lake, I started hearing women talk. Like one day I was sitting next to a woman at the Hamlet office, and she said, I quit my job at the mine because my boss didn't respect me. So what does that mean? So from there, we want to make sure that Inuit women have a safe place to work, and also that when they report that that they know that something's going to be dealt with, whatever they're experiencing. I have also met a couple of times with Agnico, looking at their harassment policy and advise them, it has to be user-friendly. These policies are drafted by lawyers, and if you don't know your policy, that affects, if you don't understand the policies that affects you, it's not useful to you. So those are things I have brought up with them.
Thank you. Olivia, how, thinking about what Rebecca has just raised, what are your thoughts about what your company can do about these issues, and specifically even thinking about the policies themselves and making them user friendly?
Yes, thank you. I totally agree with Rebecca. I think that every employee, no matter man, woman, kaplunak, what have you, has the right to feel safe at work, and creating policies that are more robust in plain language so that people understand them is a good way to go. Something that we've done at Agnico Eagle is we have a civility and respect training program. So this is mandatory for all employees, contractors, anybody who's going to site must go through this training program. That's something that we put in place recently. And yeah, I feel exactly the same way, where I believe people should feel safe at work. And this is one way that Agnico is trying to mitigate those circumstances.
Over in Baffinland, Kudloo, do you have similar programs, and what is your company doing to address these issues?
Sure, thank you. We have the all-night action plan that we developed. I feel like I need to think about what year it is after this pandemic. The year is a year and a half, but we've had it in place for a couple of years. So we did lose somewhat of a year in implementing it, but and for the very reason that our we were hearing some complaints and concerns, and we wanted to learn how to address them. So we did some roundtables, and we visited the communities. We held one-on-one sessions and other discussions to learn exactly where we needed to improve. We're at 29% women in terms of our Inuit workforce. So we're quite proud of that number, but we can always do better. We can always ensure that when they are at the mine, they feel safe and supported. We don't have any particular programs. One of your questions is, do you have programs that offer funding or what have you? We don't have anything of that sort, but what we do have is a program where if an employee were to have a specific idea in mind or initiative that they wanted to run with, we can certainly help them with that and provide support there. We also have our sponsorship fund that is very, very broad for any community member who has ideas and wants to, if the only caveat with the sponsorship fund is really that it promotes healthy living in the community, and this would certainly fit the bill. So yeah, this discussion definitely resonates with the company, and we're excited to get back out into the communities again to continue with our action plan, with the implementation of our action plan. It has 3 categories because as you know, it's not just recruitment, it's retention and oh, I'm missing the third R.
Advancement. It's recruitment, retention, and advancement, right?
Yes, thank you. Better than me.
I call it the 3 R's. I always think it's really funny because it's R, R, and A. But
yes,
yep.
That's right. I was like, what's the third R? Anyway, so we're looking forward to getting back into the communities again and really working with them to ensure that we're demonstrating that we're meeting our objectives, because we set deadlines, we set timeframes, and the strategies are really objective based, so that they weren't too gray or subjective in that we couldn't demonstrate progress. We know there's a lot of gray areas, but we really wanted to show that we're committed to ensuring that we're going to get things done.
Okay, just a quick follow-on question for you before I turn to Claudine. Now, you just said 29% Inuit women, so congratulations. That's really good. Now, tell me a little bit about how spread out they are in terms of throughout the different supervisory, managerial. How are you doing, and do you track that?
Yeah, I do have that. We have awesome staff who's watching and probably screaming at their screens at me, knowing that I don't have the actual stats in front of me, but I could get them to you. A lot of our Inuit women are in the semi-skilled positions. So management, actually in our executive, we have 3 of our 8 executive members are women, not Inuit women. I'm the only Inuit on the executive, but we do have women in management as well. There's a lot of work that's required to increase those numbers, especially in the skilled and the professional classifications. But that again is in terms of advancement. We want to develop individualized career plans for women that takes into consideration their family situations or their communities and their own individual goals.
That's amazing. I've always said it takes a family to have a woman work in a mine. And so congratulations also on thinking about the family that needs to be behind the woman in order for her to be successful. Claudine, turning to you, let's ask you, Claudine, what does it take? What have we got on deck from the federal government to really support the development and progression of this topic area of supporting Inuit women in resource extraction so that we have more of the good and less of the bad?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And maybe to get at the first part of the question in terms of how it resonated, you know, obviously most of us are located in Ottawa. So, you know, we represent the sector, but we don't have the direct link to the context and the actual, you know, what it's like to work sometimes at a mine. So it's very important that we get that kind of feedback, and it helps us inform the state of the sector and where there are areas that we need to do more work. So for us, an initiative that's pretty central and that it was developed with the provinces and territories and a lot of stakeholders is the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan. So you might be familiar with that, but it's really the policy frame that we're using to champion the industry. And it does include, you know, the aspect of communities. It includes the aspect of advancing Indigenous participation and partnerships. So those are really some of the fundamental areas that will shape the vision for the sector moving into the next few decades. So there is a lot of emphasis on women's participation to the sector. So we have a bit of an aspirational target. So we would like to have 30% of women represented in the sector by 2030. You know, it's not always a big proportion of women that participate, but we want to look at more closely, you know, what could be preventing women from participating and how could we help them make sure that they actually benefit from that important economic activity. So I would say another important aspect is that the social side of economic activity is becoming more and more prevalent and important. So it's no longer just about, you know, your financial statements and your costs and your profitability. More and more now, we're seeing that investments are going to be based also on the company's ability to have high credentials for social governance and environmental aspects. So we're slowly moving into that, but it will be very important for companies to be able to demonstrate how they meet those kinds of assets and targets. So I think as a department, you know, traditionally we've really looked at the economics of the sectors, but now it's much more moving into the socio-economic aspects. So under the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan, we also work with a few organizations to try and advance the participation of women. And so we've you know, had a few grants and contributions to some organizations. And for example, we've worked with the Mining Industry Human Resources Council quite a bit to develop ways of thinking about training programs, of promoting the sector, thinking through how could we advance the participation of underrepresented groups in particular. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, but it's becoming, I would say, a bit more central to the work we're doing in representing the sector and working with industry as well. So the Mining Association of Canada in particular, who did voice their concerns as well, and flagged that this was a troubling situation. So we continue engaging with them as well and thinking through how could we contribute to improving the situation.
I'm just going to follow up before I turn it back to Lima for our second question. But Claudine, you said by 2030, you would have 33, your goal is 33% women.
30%.
Have you broken 30%, was it?
Yeah, 30 by 2030. We try to
by 30.
make them fit.
Easy numbers to remember, right? So just a quick question following on that. Have you also identified within that threshold Indigenous women? So is there a target there for the promotion of Indigenous women? And I would say that specifically we've identified that there's many unique barriers and challenges for women coming from remote communities in particular, but also from urban communities to working in the resource sector, both so the double-edged sword of sexism and racism operating against Indigenous women at times. So did you identify a threshold for that target for Indigenous women?
So I don't think we have a specific threshold, but that's something. What we're also trying to improve is our data and the information we can contribute to actually measuring these things and understanding what the situation is and how it's growing. So we know the overall Indigenous participation in the sector has grown quite a bit in the last few years. So we track that closely. We usually don't have a lot of detailed data that goes beyond that. So I think that's another important area where we want to continue improving our actual data that we can actually make decisions on and show whether there's trends and what is happening there. So, but that's an interesting aspect of it, and perhaps with your feedback of determining what a potential aspirational target could be, and perhaps of knowing where you think the sector could be going and how much women could play a role in the sector. We know that in the years to come, there's going to be more and more demand for some of these commodities to fuel all the technologies for, reducing our GHG emissions and like new electric cars and all this that's coming a little bit faster and harder. And that women have the capacity to really contribute to the sector and make a big difference. So that's an interesting aspect that I think we should take a closer look at too.
Awesome. Back to you, Lima.
Great, thank you. So the second question kind of picks up on the points that were raised during the discussion during the first question, and it's with regards to strategies. So what strategies do you have regarding hiring and retention for Inuit women? And I'll switch it up a little bit and maybe go to Kudloo or Olivia first. Olivia, let's go with you first.
Yeah, I can go first. I think for us, the strategy that we have and on is the retention of Inuit employees is making sure that they have equal access to opportunities and the recognition. So something that we've put in place is our career path training program. So with the career path, it gives equal opportunity to all employees. So you follow the steps, you do your hours, you move up within the company. No matter if you're a woman or a man, you're Inuit Recruiters, it gives that equal opportunity to all employees. So that's one way that we are dealing with our retention. Recruitment, it's something that we've constantly working on. Nunavut being such a young territory and having a lower pool of candidates for some positions. We kind of need to wait for our graduates to get their education before we can hire more people. So it's something that we're constantly working on. And I think that's a common problem for any company or government agency that's working in Nunavut, just trying to hire local people with the skill set that we're looking for. It's such a high demand that if, yeah, we can hire as many people as we want, but that you have to also consider it's taking away the employment from, let's say, the government. So it's something that we're constantly working on and trying to find ways to increase our recruitment. So we do work a lot with the GN and KIA on different training programs that we offer, whether it's pre-employment or underground training. There's so many different ways that we can try and attract new recruitees. So that's something that we're
Yep. I'm not sure if you finished, Olivia. I think you got cut off a little bit at the end.
yeah, I don't know if you have any follow-up questions for that.
No, Nakumek, thank you so much. So over to Kudloo. What strategies does Baffin Land have regarding the hiring and retention for Inuit women? I know you touched on it a little bit beforehand in the previous question as well.
Sure, thank you. Happy to expand. And really following in what Olivia had to say in terms of recruitment and opportunity. One of the biggest complaints we have we have 5 impacted communities under our Inuit Impact Benefit Agreement surrounding the mine site. And one of the major complaints for all employees, not just Inuit women, but was the fact that there was lack of ability to get medical checks. And that's obviously the first thing that has to happen before they can go to site. So we've tried to address this by hiring a doctor to fly into the communities and visit with them specifically on that. And eventually, when the lists aren't so long, when the lineups aren't so long to get the medical checks, we'll be able to have the doctor provide some support to the communities for other things other than medical checks. Training as well. As I mentioned before, individualized training, and I'm going recruiting and retention at the same time because I feel like they definitely overlap. You treat somebody good, they're going to stay. If they happen to leave, they might come back if they recall how well you've treated them. So communication was a huge issue before, where we didn't have a lot of Inuktitut as an option for in HR and other areas that would support recruitment and retention. We do now. We have Inuit cultural advisors. We have an Inuit success team. This Inuit success team is at site and helps individuals who again want to advance or just be more supported in their roles. They speak Inuktitut as well. Another major issue is daycares, and what we've decided to do is provide a child subsidy to all Nunavut Inuit employees. Right now it's at $19 a day per child. This would be after phase 2 is approved. We're not able to provide that support now, but if phase 2 is approved, we will provide it. And we will also be building daycares in the 5 communities. So we'll have the construction of the daycares and obviously spaces for our Inuit employees saved for those daycares, plus the subsidy. We also offer, for retention, mental health support. So we have a 1-800 number, 24 hours a day. They can access Inuit counselors, Inuktitut counselors. or counselors who speak Inuktitut 24 hours a day. And also we have our Ilisak Civic Society program where we have provided a counselor in each community that they can access when they're home. So we want our employees to feel very supported when they're working and not working. And we have Inuit Recruiters. That was one of the other things that we learned, that people are far more likely to approach you and ask about work when they could do it in their own language, and they can do it with somebody that they recognize, maybe somebody from home or somebody, a friend of a friend. So we have instituted Inuit Recruiters, and when we do our HR engagement tours, which means we fly to each community and host these tours, we have Inuit Recruiters with us to answer questions to ensure that we can help them with that. But last point I want to make is in actual interviews as well. Our interviews are very informal, but we also provide support for those interviews. So we call them before the interview and say, these are questions that might be asked of you. This is something you might want to know before the interview. Do you have any questions? We'll leave it with you. You can call us back before the actual interview, so that when the interview comes, it's not so scary. It's not such a big unknown. And when we learn from them, when they ask us their questions before the interview. So that's been super helpful. We don't have any employment barriers. We don't have any education requirements. We don't have any work experience requirements even for our entry-level positions. But we still find the interview process really important, because we get to know the employee and they get to know us, because it's an agreement between the employee and the company that it needs to be shared, and everyone's understanding what would be expected of them when they do come to site. So I'll get into some of the other community initiatives we'll be running later. I feel like I'm taking up too much time. Thanks.
Thank you so much for delving into the different initiatives, and that's really encouraging to hear. Pauktuutit was actually invited to the initial roundtable for the Avnight Action Plan, and I do remember I was in the Nunavut at the time in 2019, and I remember childcare in particular was a topic that keeps coming up across, not only at the roundtable, but through all of our work, the accessibility and affordability of childcare as a particular obstacle and gendered obstacle for Inuit women trying to access any type of employment, sustainable employment, particularly with couple defying the fly-out schedule. So it's really encouraging to hear about the potential works if phase 2 is approved around childcare subsidy. I think that's incredible. In addition to the working towards the availability and accessibility of more mental health services, that's something we've heard as well. So that's incredible. I'll pass it on to Rebecca. Rebecca, from an organizational perspective from Pauktuutit, what are your perspectives around some of the strategies and that have been outlined by Olivia and Kudloo around hiring and retention for Inuit women? Is there something more that can be done by the industry actors? And more importantly, is there a role that Pauktuutit can play when these initiatives are being planned and implemented?
Okay, I just want to go back to when Olivia set their policy on civility. That's one thing I brought up with Agnico, was that civility is a word we don't use up here very often. And so the policies have to be in plain language, especially harassment policies have to be in plain language for us to understand fully. Also, when I met with the senior management for Agnico, we have talked a bit about what we can do for women at the mine. And one thing I fully support is counseling services, and in Inuktitut, like the one we have in Baker Lake, we provide counseling in Inuktitut, also in English. And I also said we could do, Managerial is the organization, we can go up and do awareness for women up there, because a lot of women, they will quit before they report or try to deal with this on top of other responsibilities. And I was glad to hear that, L'Oreal, you said that, talking about daycare subsidies. We had mentioned, I think, daycares at the site, but I wouldn't want to send my kids up there to a site. So I think in Baker Lake, which is a fairly big community, we have a daycare that can only take 9 children. And when the women go to work, it's usually the elders that end up looking after the kids, and they miss school, and they're not eating properly, I'm sure, and they're subject to higher risk of being abused. So that's a big concern for us. We also want Inuit specific support services, like I said, in mental health, grief support, healing programs that can be provided in Inuktitut. We also wanted a women's support network where women can feel supported and have somebody to talk to. Yeah, that's all I will say for now.
Great. Rebecca. Claudine, over to you. Is there something from around strategies around retention of hiring and hiring and retention of Inuit women from a governmental perspective, where there's a role for collaboration or leadership from the federal government in this regard?
Yeah, that's another good question. And obviously with the realities of specific companies, we're not directly involved, and there's definitely a strong role for the provinces and territories in terms of skills training, education, and those kinds of areas. I think there were some important federal announcements more recently in terms of some investments that are targeted at some of these areas, but obviously Natural Resources Canada don't lead on those specific programs. But I think where we do have a say at the table and where we can talk about the industry and what the reality of the industry is and where there's a need, that's where this kind of information is really important. And as I said before, having the data and having the evidence to then push for certain policy recommendations and actions. I think another aspect that's important, as I mentioned before, we do work closely with the Mining Association of Canada, and they've made some inroads with the Towards Sustainable Mining program. And that now has a component that's a standard on Indigenous and community relationships. It's still, I would say, fairly new and being developed, but I think that's something where there will be more focus into the coming years. And it does touch on actions that ensure management employees at mine sites are educated on the history of Indigenous peoples and receive skills-based training in intercultural competency and conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. So I think those kinds of industry-led initiatives where we continue to encourage them to do these kinds of programs that are recognized around the world as being quite strong for the sector, and just continuing to work with them in terms of, okay, well, how can you measure some of this, and how can you continue making sure that companies abide by certain criteria and that they have to report against these things. So I think that that's a good start and something to continue discussing with industry. If companies want to be members of the Mining Association of Canada, they have to abide by the Towards Sustainable Mining Standard. So I think that in return makes Canadian-based companies more attractive in terms of, the governance that they can show that they're undertaking at operations. So it's a bit of a removed, policy perspective where we don't have direct programs or policies that apply companies specifically. But I think this is a really good tool to try and encourage more of the social aspect of the work environment and the culture and how employees are being treated and the well-being of women in particular and Indigenous women specifically. So I think that's definitely something to continue to explore and to work with them toward perfecting in the future.
Great, thank you so much, Claudine. I'll pass it over to Janelle for the next question.
Thanks, everybody. Our third discussion question here. I do have some follow-up questions specifically for the Kudloo and Olivia who are working at the mining company. So I will start with the two of you with respect to this question. Maybe I'll go to Kudloo first this time, and then I'll go to Olivia after. So the question is, what are some of the top strategies you have in place to mitigate issues of sexual violence and harassment in the workplace? And then I have a couple follow-up questions that have been submitted that include whether or not mining companies do criminal records checks and if there are rape kits on site as well. So we'll start with the question of top strategies in place to mitigate this, and then I can come back to the follow-up questions after. So go ahead, Kudloo.
Strategies for mitigating. We have a zero tolerance policy. And to Rebecca's points about the policies that they shouldn't be drafted by lawyers, or they shouldn't read as though they're drafted by lawyers. Anyways, we have. Sorry, I'm in a shared space, so if you hear some background noise, few adults and 3 dogs, but anyways, we have the policy. We also have a 1-800 whistleblower number so that people can feel comfortable in making complaints without any retribution. There shouldn't be anyways, but if they're afraid that there might be, and they could give their complaints or concerns in Inuit, English, whatever language they prefer, and they could remain anonymous. But we do encourage them to leave their name and number so that we can contact them for more information in order to ensure that it's a full circle file that's handled, that there are consequences, or there is, at least we're able to report back who has made to the person who's made the complaint. And our policies are in English and Inuit. We have them on our website. We have them on a Baffin app, so a mobile app. And as I mentioned before, we have very specific positions that allow for Inuit to provide these complaints or concerns in Inuit. So, and if they want to do that in their community, we also have trained BCLOs as well to ensure that they are able to take these complaints. And our policy ensures that there is a very specific process to how the complaints are handled. The complainant will hear within 10 days what our actions are. And if there's any further actions that are required, that they will be outlined as well. And we will continue to follow up until we feel some closure or until the complainant feels closure. And again, to Rebecca's really good point about Inuit women typically will quit before they complain. And so we do have follow-up. If that happens, it always raises red flags for us, and we do follow up with them to ensure that something didn't happen, that they're maybe too shy to talk about, or that don't, they feel like they can't talk about it without any sort of consequences. So in terms of any sort of turnover with Inuit women, that we follow up for sure with them and make sure that everybody's leaving on good terms, or there isn't something that we could do to prevent them from leaving, and always leaving the door open for them to come back. Did you want me to respond to those follow-up questions, or is that a different time?
Yeah, why not? While you have the floor. So there was 2 questions there that were asked of, do you know if criminal record checks are done prior to hiring, and if there are rape kits on site?
Yes. So I know for certain about the first question. I don't know about the rape kits, but I will find out. We have fully trained physician assistants at site, but I can't be certain that they do provide the kits. But to your first question, oh my God, I forget what it is.
It was if the criminal records checks are
Yes. Yeah, it's the heat. We do. It's a requirement, criminal record checks, and unfortunately, they used to take up a lot of time, and they were a bit of a barrier before, because our CMP stations are so busy and swamped and what have you. But we have found a way for them to provide us with a clear path toward them that would not inhibit them to come to the site if there's nothing that would be of concern. So if there is somebody who has a criminal record check, it's a deeper dive into what that what they may have been charged with or convicted with. That's a discussion with them, but it's handled very much on a individual basis in terms of whether or not it'll affect their employment, and more importantly, if it would affect that specific position that they're applying for. So it might not be, might be something related to finances. Maybe they won't go into the, any kind of finance department or what have you, but that shouldn't prevent them from becoming a truck driver or whatever it may be. So we definitely handle those criminal record checks on an individual basis. But I'll find out about the rape kits before.
Great. Thank you. We'll go to Olivia now, and I'll just pose the discussion question here to you, Olivia. And it is, what are some of the top strategies that you have in place to mitigate issues of sexual violence and harassment in the workplace?
Thank you, Janelle. Similar to Baffin, we do have a zero tolerance policy, and that's something that is presented upon the hiring, and it's presented in what we call our e-learning. So this is something that every employee, contractor, visitor must complete before they come onto our mine sites. So that is something presented to everybody. Also, we do offer services to all our employees. We have employee assistance programs. We have our HR staff on site. Something I have a lot of experience with. I was working HR on site for 4 years, so I know the life, the type of situations people are going through. And we offer all kinds of support programs to employees if any situations do happen on site. For the criminal record check, as per our IABA, it's not required to do criminal record checks for employees. This is something that came from the Inuit Association, and it's part of our IBA. However, we do require it for any person working underground because they will need a explosives certificate. So as per the law, it's a requirement to do criminal records checks for people working underground. Yeah. For the other question that you posed about the rape kits, I'm not 100% sure. But to my knowledge, we do not have any on site. In those types of situations where we would need one, we work very closely with these services in the communities. So our mine sites are pretty close proximity to Baker Lake and Rankin Inlet. So any kind of serious situations like that, we always contact the authorities and the health centers. Make sure we're working together on those kinds of cases.
Thank you, Olivia. I'll go to Rebecca and then Claudine, and I'll just give you a chance maybe to respond or comment on any of the strategies that Kudloo and Livia spoke to, and if there's any other strategies that perhaps you are seeing or would like to see in the workplace, please feel free to add that to the conversation. So Rebecca, I'll pass it to you.
Yes, regarding the rape kit, it's 4 hours by bus from here to the mine and 4 hours back. So that's the reason why I asked about the rape kits. And I don't know if they would fly somebody into Baker Lake for the test. From what people tell me, women especially, sometimes they're not believed by the courts because there's not enough evidence. So that's a concern if they don't have the rape kits right on site. Just wanted to bring that up.
Does anyone have any thought on that? Because I mean, it really is a barrier, right? If you can't get quickly, once you've been violated, if you can't quickly get to a physician, I think that it's really tough for women. They want to, the tendency we see in the literature in particular, but in reality, we see that women very quickly just go to cleaning themselves. Olivia, what are your thoughts? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I agree with Rebecca that they should be something that are on site. I mean, our mine sites, we have fully equipped clinics on site with staffed with nurses day and night. So it's definitely something that I believe we should look into, and it's something that I will bring up with our health and safety department. It should be standard practice to have these kinds of kits on all sites.
Thank you, Olivia. I will go over to Claudine and give her an opportunity to comment or add to this discussion. Claudine, go ahead.
Sure. I always feel like a bit the odd one out. I'm talking in a very different sort of context, but I think for the federal government overall, you know, there's a lot of attention on the response to gender-based violence against women, and in particular Indigenous women and girls, LGBTQ and two-spirited people, is something that's very much being looked at fairly broadly in terms of Canada's strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence. Through that, there's a national action plan and a federal pathway on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So that's not a natural resources lead, but as a department that's obviously very focused on the extractive sectors in particular, where there are camps and issues around them that need to be looked at and addressed. It's really important, especially when there are temporary camps, lots of movement and those kinds of situations. We know that there's more risks and concerns, especially when they're close to Indigenous communities, where there can be some risks of violence or other issues erupting. So it's very much, as I said before, the question, you know, we're always obsessed with data and measuring things and knowing how to react, but I think there's also a few examples of community-led initiatives. So to make sure women in particular are safe, and the Trans Mountain Project expansion, I guess that one in particular has included a focus on that aspect, as well as other early stage projects of major resources development. Another thing I would mention that we see a little bit more now evolving too is that with the new Environmental Assessment Act, there's the Impact Assessment Agency has a way of this is more for new projects that are coming on, but of looking at what the impacts are on women and any gender specific issues or risks involved with those projects. So this is more like thinking into the future. So there's not much, you know, specific to the department where I work, but I would say moving into the future, I think, you know, I'm in the lands and minerals sector, so more the mining sector, but we also have the Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation team. So that's headed by Angie Bruce. So they look at much more in detail, like economic reconciliation and what that can mean, and just the impact of resource projects on local communities from all aspects, including women and Indigenous women in particular. One thing too, looking into the future, is with the UNDRIP legislation, there's also the aspect of developing an action plan. So from Natural Resources Canada, we will have a part to play there, and thinking through, okay, well, what do we need to look at in more detail when it comes to natural resources projects, and different areas that we should be considering in terms of making sure that we're being consistent with the requirements for UNDRIP. So I think that that's the level of specificity I can provide. I mean, I think there was also through the federal envelope, sorry, there's lots of construction here. Through the federal envelope, there is some funding available in response as well for the National Action Plan. And I think that you might be aware of that aspect, and you know, that's something we'll have to continue looking into, and the possibilities for addressing this situation in particular.
Thanks, Claudine. You know, a couple of things are sticking with me. Interestingly, Kudloo, some of your words are sticking with me. One of which was Inuit women will quit before they complain. So that's one thing you said. Another thing you said was that people need to be able to speak in their language to feel comfortable, and they need to speak to somebody that they know. Let's think about this when it comes to assault and the experience of assault and reporting. What are your thoughts about this, Kudloo, in terms of implementing safe and strong procedures at a project site so women have someone they can go to that they trust and speak to in the language? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll begin by stating that I did hear back from our health and safety team confirming that we do have rape kits at site, and that our physician assistants at site are actually not employed by Baffin. So they're independent of Baffin. So that, you know, it would be a very independent investigation or support that's provided to our employees. God forbid anything like that should happen. And secondly, I'd like to state that I'm not the expert when it comes to how an employee would be treated, because that's trauma, and that's, you know, that's a whole other serious ballgame that that I know I won't get right if I try and explain what our company does. But I can say with a lot of confidence that our health and safety team do have plans that should something like this happen, that they would put that plan into place to support our Inuit employees. We have Inuit cultural advisors on site that come from the communities. So these are people that are known by our Inuit employees that would most definitely be involved in something that would require support for our employees. We rely on them quite heavily for things like if an employee loses somebody in their family and they need to be notified, it's a cultural advisor who does that, as an example. So, you know, these are the relationships that the cultural advisors have with employees to date. So if something like that were to happen, they would most definitely be involved. But in the actual steps that are taken to ensure that that we do it correctly, not only from an investigation perspective, because we would have to notify the RCMP ASAP, but from a care, from a support aspect and how it's done. Again, I'd rather leave that for the health and safety team to be able to provide that information. But I know they have those plans in place.
Thank you, Ulu. Claudine, coming to you, just a specific question that was typed into the chat. So Claudine, what about this question we raised in the report that we noted that there was pay inequity? So Inuit women are getting paid less than Inuit and non-Inuit men for the same work. What do you see at the federal government? Are you tracking this across companies? And then Ulu and Olivia, are you tracking this as well in your companies, the pay equity issue? So we'll start with Claudine, then we'll go to Olivia, then Ulu.
Yeah, so I think this is an important question for a lot of women throughout Canada, for a lot of sectors, and something that we're raising on a more regular basis. I think people are now familiar that this exists for different areas of work. We don't track specific company information. I'm not sure we would have access to it, but I would say that gender parity and those kinds of issues are central to the agenda, for the feminist agenda of the government right now. And it wouldn't be Natural Resources Canada directly working on this kind of issue. But I mean, the more information we can have and the more informed issues we can raise, the better. So I think, it's a bit of an issue of, who can be regulated as well. I mean, if you're a federally regulated enterprise or organization, it's a little bit different. But for the private sector, I think still quite a bit of work needs to be done on that front.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it certainly does. And so I will just turn that to, I know Olivia's having some troubles with her connection. So we'll go to Ulu on whether your company is tracking pay equity and thinking about that from an actual numerical perspective. Are you looking at that issue?
I will have to get a confirmation, but what I do know is that a lot of our positions are unionized, and so every position is looked through that lens in terms of equality, and we know that there would be that for Inuit women, that it would be the same sort of scrutiny to ensure that there wasn't any inequalities. But I mean, I say that, but I understand that there are still people who feel differently, and people who may have their own experiences. So I think what's important is understanding what their concerns are and trying to figure out, perhaps it's a better explanation as to how the pay grade is used by managers, by their supervisors, and also for employees to understand how it's recorded, how it's paid out. But one of the things I wanted to mention earlier when we talked about our strategies, even though I'm not doing a very good job of it in this webinar, I'd like to highlight the fact that we have really good records to ensure, like, you don't know what you don't know if you don't track what it is that needs to be fixed. So we've learned early to try and track as much information as possible regarding Inuit employment, and more specifically around Inuit women employment. So at Baffin and pay and what have you. I don't have those at hand, obviously, but I think it's important to note that there's, with this information, we're armed with the ability to ensure that there aren't or at least we're trying to ensure that there's no inequities, and we're trying to ensure that people feel as equal as others. But without specifics, I can't, you know, I think the worst thing that someone could feel is somebody like myself on a webinar saying, oh, we're doing everything great. But then, you know, they're sitting back going, well, how come I don't feel that way? So I'm trying to stay away from language that says that it's, you know, it doesn't happen at our company, because I'm sure it does. And all we could do is promise to look into it and make sure that doesn't happen to the next individual. So sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of maybe explaining that, but we're going to keep trying.
Thank you, Lou. I think your humility there is important, right? I think that, and truly, the need to really listen to women is something that I'm hearing loud and clear from many of our panelists, is that we need to create those spaces so that women can come forward with their experiences. And you know, the fact that you talked early about how you're running focus groups to understand the realities, I think that's very important, right? To really hear from women what's happening in spaces where women can raise those issues. Turning to I know that we've, if anybody has any more questions, please feel free to bring them into our chat. Rebecca, turning to you, what's, you know, we've just spent about an hour listening to folks talk about the art of what they're doing. What about the art, you know, dreaming big? What are the options going forward? What does the future hold for us in terms of addressing the well-being of Inuit women in the resource extraction sector? What can we do? What more can we do? Do you have any suggestions to round us out? Rebecca. I'm just reminding you, you're on mute, Rebecca. Thank you. There you go.
In order to ensure that Inuit women are meaningfully included in all the processes and discussions related to their well-being and safety, it's important that representative organizations such as Pauktuutit have a seat at the table. I have been meeting with Agnico Eagle, and they've been very receptive to my suggestions as to what can be done better. For this to happen, there must be more direct relationship on these topics between Pauktuutit and the federal government, such as Natural Resources Canada. Also, working on the policies and future regulations, monitoring and evaluation of these activities should be done. Like I said earlier, we need to be part of the workplace policies and incorporate recommendations and strategies brought forward by the Inuit women across the country. So this needs to be worked on further. I think that we work closely with the mining industry to make sure that their policies are meaningful or understood by all the workers.
Thank you so much. Following on this, do you have kind of a roundup question, answer, Claudine, to think about in terms of where can we go from here? You referred to many of the initiatives that we've got going in the federal government. So thanks for flagging those, from the new legislation to MMIWG, but give us a little bit more about your thoughts of where we can go from here.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, discussions like these are really important so that we're able to better understand the context on the ground and what is really happening and what the reality is. You know, we don't, you know, I've been up north once in my life, and, you know, that was a great experience, but in no way can I claim to know what it feels like to work at a mine site and to be an Indigenous person in addition to that. So I think it's really important for us to be educated in terms of what that context really is and what it means to people's lives. And I think right now, with the focus on diversity and inclusion and making sure we actually listen to voices that perhaps in the past we didn't, I think that's really important for economic reconciliation. So I think, economic activity and the role of workers, the well-being of workers, I personally see that as becoming more and more important. As a department, as I said, when the report was made available, we were asked a lot of questions. What are we doing about this? What's happening with this? Why is this happening? And so a lot of questions that we can't answer as representatives of the sector itself, but it's really clear that the government is taking this seriously and asking those questions, like what more could we do? So I think it's a good time to really have those conversations, and we'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation, for example, on the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan and what that's all about, and potential initiatives we could work together on. Happy to do that. And I think, as I said, the towards sustainable mining is something that other countries look to us about and are curious about. And I think if we can work to bolster those kinds of programs and initiatives, that's also very important. And as I mentioned earlier, with the push on ESG in terms of, some big investors are saying we're going to pull out of companies that aren't doing a good job with, governance of how they manage the company, or how they deal with environmental issues, and how they deal with the social issues and the impacts of operating in communities. If that becomes stronger and stronger, there's going to be a need for companies to be able to report and say, actually, our workers, the well-being is quite high, or, so I think employees have an important say in that, and in making sure that, there's some accountability, and that there's ways of measuring these types of things. So not just measuring the financial, the financial aspects of a company or the production aspects of a company, but also the workforce and what that means. So anyways, I leave that open, and we'd be happy to have a follow-up discussion and really learn from you what you think might be the avenues that would be perhaps better at supporting, the outcomes you're hoping to see, or the areas where there's perhaps more communication that would be helpful, and including for us to be better informed and to thereby inform the policies and the recommendations that we make.
I found it really interesting what you had to say there just now, Claudine, because one of the things you said was that you needed to learn and listen more. And actually that's what Udlu is doing in Baffinland, right? Running those focus groups. And that's humility, right? That's the humility that we like to see. I think we like to see in our federal workers in particular, that sitting in the seat of power in Ottawa, you recognize that you don't have the answers. So I think that's a really, beautiful response to this question. And I'm interested, Rebecca, if you have a comment on this about how we can support our federal government, particular the people, the real live people in the government. How can we support them to understand the context better in the North, in the projects where women are working, so that they can get that, so that their policies are not on paper, that they're meeting women's real needs in communities and in projects. Rebecca, do you have some thoughts about that?
I regularly meet with federal ministers also once a year. I also sit on the Inuit Tapalikanatami, and once a year we have Inuit Crown Partnership meeting, sometimes once a year with the Prime Minister. And those are things that I bring up, the major concerns that we have for women, Inuit women. I think we'll keep doing that. Just keep them updated on what's happening. I look forward to more of these meetings because it helps to know what's happening on the other. Like, I didn't know anything about Baffin land really, and it's good to hear what they have over there, so we can learn what's happening and get some more ideas as to how we can go forward.
Thank you so much, Koinamik. Olivia, you're back. Welcome back. And I know you're having trouble with your internet. It must be very frustrating. Olivia, just wondering if you have kind of where do we go from here? What are your thoughts? What can we do? You in Agnico, or you, you know, where you think this industry can go, whether it's from the industry perspective or as an individual woman working in the industry. What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was very interesting to have this webinar, especially with the topic at hand, being the exact demographic that we're talking about. I am an Inuit woman working in the resource industry, and I've worked in operations, so I understand the reality that these women have gone through or have experienced it. And I think bringing awareness, having discussions like this is a great way to go, a great way to start. And we can kind of, we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, we can expand the notion of diversity to not only the organization itself, but to the larger systems that constitute its environment. So for example, Nunavut, taking that concept of inclusiveness and inclusiveness in the workplace refers to not only accepting and using diversity of the workforce, but also the community. So bringing into the community, being active in the community, you're being more inclusive and creating more diversity within your workplace. I think this will help us understand the realities that our employees live, not just being within our own company, but also being in the communities that our employees come from, knowing what they're going through at home, not only at the work site, will give us a new perspective to open up to more of these conversations. And the best way, I think, moving forward is to create that awareness where employees feel comfortable about talking about these kinds of topics, creating those safe spaces, whether it's on the mine site or in the communities, making sure that there are supports put in place. And a lot of times, I can speak from experience working in operations, there are, let's say, situations that happen within the community that happen to our employees. And it's something, being in such a remote place on site, you're always going to have your home life bleed into your work life bleed into your home life. So sometimes we find ourselves facing situations that may happen within the community, but it's coming to the mindset as well, because there's that close proximity, right? So advocating for our employees to have more services, more resources in the communities, and working with different agencies to make sure that they can access that while they're at home, not only outside, but while they're at home. I think these are things that we as a society as a whole need to consider bringing into not only the workplace, but also the communities, and how we can work together to make sure there are those safe spaces. Just kind of
thank you.
My thoughts about it.
I love it. And I love how personal your answer is, Olivia. You know, one thing we didn't think about a lot is the safe spaces for men to have these conversations. That's probably another topic for you, Rebecca, is the, you know, is building the relationships of men. And I know that in Southern Canada, the Moose Hide campaign has been one where men have really supported each other to speak out when they see they see innuendo, they see inappropriate jokes or racism. So there's a whole movement that has emerged around that, and you know, much like we've taken workplace injuries so seriously, right? In the last 20 years, occupational health and safety has been a very core focus for the industry, for mining industry in particular. And I think we can really think about seeing that our attention turn in Northern Canada to addressing this issue and thinking about how to support men to have those conversations and move each other forward. So just a side note, and thank you, Olivia. Kudloo, where do you think we need to go? What are your thoughts? What do we need to track in the future on this topic?
Where do we need to go? And up. more women everywhere. I think at the sites and at home working for the mining companies. I said earlier that I wanted to come back to a couple other community initiatives that we hope will be underway next year. But my answer is a bit twofold. I want to go back to your comments, questions around what the federal government can do. I think that's important, especially considering the fact that we're such a huge territory, and there's a lot of work that's been done about women in the extractive industries in the South. This isn't new. This is, you know, something we're constantly going to have to be working at. So what is it that we can learn in Nunavut about what Indigenous communities have done in the past to support their Indigenous women going to mining sites? As Inuit, we're very different than First Nations and Métis, but we also have a lot of shared experiences as well. So I think it's important to bring us together, to learn from each other what works, what doesn't. And I think the federal government could play that role in convening, helping us to convene and helping us to understand from one another what experiences have been learned. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We could share from one another. You mentioned it yourself, Ginger, that it's good to have these sessions to learn from one another. And then just to touch on the excellent comments that Olivia made, I think it reminded me of kind of this pandemic that we've been going through. March 2020, we sent all our Inuit home in Nunavut, our Nunavut Inuit home. The Inuit that were working out of Nunavut were able to come to work. But we sent them home on standby wages, and we're only just bringing them back this week. It's been a long haul. We're very, very happy to be welcoming them back. Every time we went to the communities, we were asked, when can we come back to work? It was always so encouraging and you know, so heartfelt to know that that they missed being at the site. But what we learned more than anything is how much of our workforce at site missed them, for a number of reasons. But more importantly, I think a good time now is to reflect on where we get our strength from as a mining company, and at site. Where do we get our strengths from? And, you know, I can go into a number of examples of why our employees missed our Inuit counterparts. You know, the warmth they bring to the workforce, their experiences, just they make up the fabric of our workforce. So to have them missing was really difficult. But I know that where I'm going with this, more specifically around women, is personality or character, you know, is what I'm trying to get at. Like being able to have a workforce that reflects human nature, like human personality. And without women, you know, it's without women being able to bring that, because our numbers really fell when we had replacement workers during the pandemic. A lot of women had to stay home and tend to the families, of course. So we have mostly men this last year. And that was probably one of the biggest realizations, is how important it is to have women at the workforce, because it really does provide more of a home or natural atmosphere as opposed to just a workplace. And if you're going to be spending 2-3 weeks at a time with everybody, they are your second family. I've heard that oftentimes. So you really do need to have it as reflective as possible. So to the other points in terms of community initiatives, we are going to be instituting community training programs to ensure that our employees at home can get trained at home and can understand what it's going to look like when they get to site, and they could spend some time considering what they want to be at site. So in terms of where we want to go forward, instead of trying to handpick employees based on what positions are available, we want to take this a step further and explain the full gamut of what positions are available at site. And I think that will help Inuit women determine what's most suited for them, instead of taking the regular, we have a lot of women in like cleaning positions and entry-level positions. And if they could understand what other options are available to them, and that they have a training component to them that would be catered to them, I think you're going to see far more diversity in what women do at site. So learning how to do that before they get to site, I think, is super, super important. I think that's where we need to go in the future. We shouldn't expect them just to apply for a job because it's available. We should be giving them the full gamut of what's available to them. And the other thing I wanted to mention again was the support at home. We're going to provide more positions at home. We're going to be creating 7 new positions in each community as community-based positions, so that we can support community-based positions instead of going to the mine site. And these training programs that I told you about, they're going to be 6 months long. So with no obligation to work for Baffin and after. If they end up that they go to work for the GN or the Hamlet or whatever it may be, that's so be it. But like I said earlier, if you treat them well, they'll come back, or they'll stick with you. So that's our intent with the community-based initiatives. So I guess I could leave it there. Just to the point about the safe spaces and having those conversations with men. Definitely an interesting concept. And I think that, not interesting in that it hasn't been done before, but in that we can expand that idea to ensure that there's the mentorship role, that support. If women see their male co-workers taking the initiative to participate in these type of places for men to discuss the issues at the workforce, at the workplace that they're not comfortable with, I think they would feel far more supported and understand that they're not alone, that they don't just that it's not just women who understand that what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. So I love that idea, and I think we should be exploring it some more. Thank you.
Thank you. And honestly, exploring it all together, I imagine just this exchange between yourself and Olivia has been really good for cross-pollination, right? In terms of sharing ideas, sharing the brilliant strategies you both have in your companies, and then pushing out a challenge to the federal government. I love it. There's a good challenge there for you, Claudine. And then getting that connectivity with Rebecca, just the relationships we built here today are going to carry us forward as women, and and all of the men that are going to be working on this issue as well. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lima to take us into our close.
Thanks, Ginger, and thank you so much to the panelists. for your expertise, insights, and perspectives. These aren't easy conversations to navigate, but so critically important. And we really hope this is one of the many conversations we have in the future between Pauktuutit, our federal partners, and our industry partners and colleagues as well, on how to prioritize the well-being of Inuit women and their families, and how to move forward in a substantially meaningful way. So thank you so much, everybody, for making the time to be here. I'd like to thank for everybody who is also tuning in, our colleagues at the Firelight Group for helping us host this incredible webinar and facilitate as well. And just a reminder that the session is being recorded and will be available afterwards for folks who couldn't attend or would like to rewatch the session. So with that, I'd like to wish everybody a really good evening. So Qianamik, Nakomik, and Matna.
Vietnamese. Thank you, everybody.
Ma'am, matna daw.